So here we are, the final core function of any business that a CEO is responsible for. And you as a recruiter play a heavy hand in this. We're talking about the human resources department, and we're gonna add a little sprinkle on top of that because it's really important for you to understand this piece of it. It's not only HR, but it's also executive leadership, and these are C-level executives. And so the relationship and the structure of those leaders that really run human resources and the C-level executives for any company are going to be one of the most critical pieces to any organization, and a CEO heavily depends on that. At the end of the day, any organization, what you're doing is you're managing human capital assets. You're only good as your human capital, and that means employees. And so this is where a lot of emphasis has to come into the types of people that we as recruiters hire. Now, there used to be a time ago when I first got into recruiting, and this was like in the mid-90s, when I got into recruiting, there was a very clear distinction between human resources and recruiting. And essentially there wasn't one. It all came into one. Human resources was recruiting. And so the old days of going to the HR department to fill out an application and turn it into an HR rep. That's how it used to be in the 90s, the early 2000s. And then all of a sudden technology came on board. And so corporate America really got a handle on this, and they decided to basically extract recruiting and make talent acquisition its sort of own entity. Now, today, there's a lot of companies and organizations that still jumble them up together. There's a lot of old school people out there that still think of HR and recruiting being the same thing, but it's clearly not. But there are organizations also that really value the importance of the partnership and the collaboration between recruiting, talent acquisition, and human resources. And so a lot of times, even in a reporting structure, recruiting or talent acquisition at some way or another probably most likely reports to an HR director, a vice president, or a CHRO of an organization. Very rarely, and there are some times where the talent acquisition executive may have a direct line report to the CEO or the COO, or it can be a kind of a combination of things. And so you realize kind of the importance about this. So with that said, let's break this down. When we're talking about human resources, we typically think of, really the onboarding process, because ultimately when we make that hire as recruiters, we pass the baton, we give it to HR, and we are done with it. Let's move on. That's not the case anymore, because, there are experiences that new hires go through. And so the onboarding is one part of it. Orientation is another part of it. There's also, the legal ramifications. There's contracts and agreements that are put in place for these new hires. And as recruiters, we have to be well equipped with it, right? So whether it's even as simple as background checks, or if you're working in a government contracting area, you're going to be dealing with security clearances. There's a lot of different agreements that you're going to have to manage when it comes to hiring people into an organization. And so those legal pieces do become important. And so that's why having a relationship with the contracts and administration team is going to be important for you as a recruiter. But within human resources, one of the big sort of champion themes for the last, I'd say probably 5 to 10 years has been really all about diversity and inclusiveness. And the diversity inclusion becomes front and center for any organization, especially because of sort of what we're going through culturally as a country and kind of some of the divisions and periods that we've gone throughout the year. And so we've been kind of really escalating and making sure that we can have a nice balance, fair opportunities, equal opportunities for talent that's out there. And so that onus all of a sudden comes down to recruiting. All of a sudden, we're responsible for hiring a diverse candidate, identifying a diverse candidate. And so there's a lot of companies out there now that are that put sort of these guidelines in here that says you have to hire at least you have to interview at least one diverse slate of candidate, or two for that matter. The NFL instituted that plan a few years ago when they said before you can make a hire decision, you have to interview a minority candidate for a head coaching job. And so you see these kind of things, and what's happening in the marketplace is at first it was really tough. Over the last few years, it was very challenging, but then all of a sudden, all these new tools and technology came together, and the emphasis, and you started building talent acquisition teams that were diversity or inclusive in nature, and then you started looking at, content and the way you were writing job descriptions, whether they were too feminine or masculine, or were they equal or balanced. And so all of these things come into play. And as a recruiter, you got to stay on top of it. No matter what your belief systems are in your personal life, when you are in business, your attention to diversity, inclusion has to be front and center for the organization. And you have to represent it at the highest ethical standards on that front. So now the other thing that comes into play again is going to be, and this has been typically in a human resources sort of responsibility, but a lot of times HR gets a knock. Human resources a lot of times they don't have the same recruiting mindset that we have, and so they think differently, right? And we know that, and so we chuckle a lot of times when it comes to human resource teams and things of that nature. Now, again, not all of them, being general here for the most part, but employee retention and attrition becomes an important part of a business. And as a CEO, this is probably one area here that they really keep an eye on. They want to know what the attrition rates are. What are the retention programs that are out there that we can keep? Because the longer you keep employees at a company, the more tenure, the more reputable they are, the better reviews you get. All of those things matter. And so as recruiters, what I've seen over the last couple of years has been a sort of a shift where recruiters are now kind of looking into retention programs and, sort of these retention initiatives that actually recruiting can play a part of. And the reason why we can play a part of it, and I'm probably going to have an episode of this at one point, because I've gone through some pretty significant experiences when it comes to retention and attrition initiatives that falls on a talent acquisition shoulder. But the reason why is because as recruiters, we are that first line of experiences that we have with those candidates. And when they get on board and they become part of an organization, we can always go back to them. We can go back to them at 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years later, 5 years later. I've gone back to some hires 5 years later, and we still have a bond. And so a lot of times there's influence behind that. And so there's a lot of different initiatives and programs and things that you can do as a recruiter to help with retention matters when it comes to human resources. And so that's where the partnership and the collaboration kind of come into play. And so that's why employee relations, which is really what typically human resources is known for, employee relations and benefits. And we got to know that, right? We got to know certain things that are going on within employees, because if things don't work out for an employee and they get let go, they get terminated, whatever it might be, guess what? We got to backfill that person. We got to backfill it. So the more heads up that we have on that employee leaving, the better, more proactive we can be as far as that piece of it goes. And sometimes there's going to be employee relations issues that kind of bubble up. We don't deal with all the highly sensitive and confidential ones, but you still play a part in it when it comes to it. And even the benefit side of it, a lot of times as recruiters, we are pitching and marketing and positioning and selling benefits. You're going to have to, especially if you're dealing with a competitive environment. You have low sort of compensation, salary levels to really leverage an opportunity with a candidate. So you're going to be put in those situations as well. But knowing your benefit structure plan is going to be important. Identifying which ones are the ones that are really a value add to an organization or to a new hire is going to become important. And so those are going to be the human resources aspects of it. I mean, you got to be exhausted here. Do you see why as a recruiter, you are responsible for so many things outside of recruiting, and you are truly a CEO of your world, your domain at the company that you're working for. And the quicker that you can understand that and decide, you know what, I'm well in tune in these areas and I'm lacking in these areas, then the quicker that you're going to increase your opportunity to become more valued, more marketable. And that's ultimately what you want. You want the ability to have opportunities to maximize your income potential. But before we close off this episode, there's one final piece, and that's really the executive leadership component. And I tie this into the human resources side of it because it's important. As a recruiter, if you don't have any interactions with C-level executive leaders, then you're far removed from becoming a top 1% recruiter, because top 1% recruiters are usually aligned or have some sort of relationships or communications with C-level executives. Now, it's going to vary. If you're working for a small firm, $25 million, $50 million company comparable to a $15 billion or $25 billion plus company, you may not have that access to that C-level that's sitting at top of the boardroom. But you still want to have exposure to who are your executive leaders within the company that you work for. Establish relationships with them, because as a CEO, the mindset that they have to have is they have to surround themselves around executive leaders, because they're looking to these leaders to give them assurances or give them direction. They're looking for their expertise to grow, to scale the company, or to deal with a lot of the challenges and difficult situations that may arise. Because at the end of the day, that's what a CEO does. A CEO deals with the complexities and the obstacles and the pitfalls of a business. And it's no different than the President of the United States. When things hit the president's desk, it's usually because there's a problem that needs to be solved. And as recruiters, that's what we do. We solve problems, we deal with challenges, we deal with the opportunities that present ourselves. We get into problem-solving mode so that we can be effective partners, and so we can have a solid reputation in the organization that we have. And when you get to that point where I've been in board meetings making executive level presentations and briefings from a talent acquisition standpoint, and you're talking about really some complex data numbers, that's where you want to get to. That is a whole different level over there within recruiting. No, don't get me wrong. If you want to be a recruiter and you just want to shuffle papers and fill jobs and that's all you want to do and you want to stay there, there's nothing wrong with that. But what I'm letting you know is there's a whole world of opportunity and options within talent acquisition. And the quicker that you adapt the mindset of a CEO and run your day-to-day business like that, the more successful and the more encouraging, the more opportunities will come your way. I really do hope that you enjoy this episode. And remember, top 1%ers, we always level up.